Hey guys, it's Barrett with the Gimme Camper. So today we're going to go over a 1-year review on the Floe, the Lippert Floe. We've used it for 1 season now. I feel like we got a pretty good understanding about it. You know, we started out with a little bit of a bumpy start. We worked with Lippert, they got all that under control. I just wanted to go over my thoughts after I've used this product for about 1 season completely now. I will say that I've almost exclusively used this to do my winterization every other week in the wintertime here in Tennessee. But if you are in the mindset of doing like DIY stuff and you have an air compressor, I can tell you how to get most of the benefits of this, especially with these like Keystone products that's got the wet bays and stuff. But you don't have to spend all that money. So I'm going to have a couple of videos in the future kind of showing some alternative methods where you get all of the benefits but none of the negatives of the system. But as far as the utilization of the system goes, because I have it installed on my rig, I will say that it's easier just to walk in there, flip the power on, and let it do its thing. All right, so let's go over some pros of the Lippert Floe. As I said, it's convenient, it's always on, it's always ready to go. All you gotta do is flip the power switch, so that says a lot. Now, in a minute, we'll go over some cons, and there are a few cons with this system. And when I first installed it, I didn't think that I would use it that much. But because it is always on and ready to go, always connected, I ended up using it more than anything else. But I will say that, you know, there are some cons and we'll get into those in a minute, but right now we're sticking to those pros. Another pro is that the Lippert Floe does protect the pump. Traditionally speaking, if you winterize like my old video that I'm going to put up here, where you just put the air adapter in the city water inlet, it does leave a vulnerability point in your pump. And I did have some issues with that, and we'll go over that in a minute too. I didn't know this, but whenever I got the Lippert Floe and I got it all hooked up, I did realize that I had a little bit of a leak and I couldn't figure out where the leak was coming from. If you want to check out the last video we did on the Lippert Floe with the install and the fix here, then I'll put that up in the corner. But I'm going to say that it kept running. It did cut off. The first time I'd put one in, it just kept running and running and running and running. And obviously these air compressors don't have a big duty cycle, which we'll get into in a minute, but it burned it up. And so when I did reinstall it with the new system, it did build up pressure and it turned off like it's supposed to, but I noticed every like 90 seconds to a minute, it would start pumping air again, and I couldn't figure out why. Well, I actually traced it down to the water pump, and there's like a pre-filter bowl with a screen on there, and that had some little micro cracks in the clear plastic cap on there. So then after I replaced that, I didn't have any more air leaks. I don't think it was leaking any water, but it was leaking some air. So that did show a weak point in that old system that I had previously been doing. Now, in Lippert's defense, I will say that it did say in the directions when I reread them, not to let it run more than a couple of minutes before you turned it off. So if it didn't build up pressure and turn off, you needed to turn it off so that you wouldn't burn the pump up the way that I did the first time. Now, going back to that pump issue that I had, which I'm still listing this as a positive because it let me know that I have a water leak that I didn't know about before. But assuming, you know, there's water just sitting in the pump, if you don't get that out of the pump, and that water sitting in that strainer basket just froze and expanded a little bit and just cracked the cap on that just a little bit. I'll say that that's one positive that I didn't think about when I got the Lippert Floe, was that, you know, if you're losing air pressure and it kicks back on, kind of like your water pump turning back on every now and then, but it's easier to hear the air slipping out of there. And so you can go to different areas of your water system, and it's only 20 PSI. So all I did when I was testing that, a lot of times I would unhook a fitting, I'd just stick my finger in the pipe, and that would be enough to block that pipe. And that let me know, because I did that before the pump and it never ran at all. And I did it hooked up to the pump with just my finger in the other end of the pump, and it still ran. So I knew that it was leaking somewhere inside the pump, and that's what let me figure that out. All right, so let's talk about the cons with the Lippert Floe. The first con that I'm going to say about the Lippert Floe is definitely going to be the price, because it's a pretty high price point. I'm not even saying that it wouldn't be worth it at that price point, but I would expect better components to be in it at that price point. So when you turn this thing on, it's pretty loud. It's actually the compressor in it. I didn't like take it apart and all that stuff, but the compressor in it, just from the sound and feel of everything, it sounds like one of those little compressors that's in just the little 12-volt things at Walmart that you can go to and pick up just to air your tire up a little bit on the side of the road. You know the ones I'm talking about. You turn them on and you're like, ah! Now, if you install the thing in your basement, then it's probably not that big of a deal, but I had too many components of everything else in my basement, so I installed it in my bathroom. And so it's right up in my living space. Now granted, you're only got it turned on whenever you're winterizing, and it's not that big of a deal. I still have a pair of earplugs hanging on that thing from where I used to put them in every time and winterize because it's so loud, but now I got to where I don't fool with it because I'm too lazy. But that is something to know, is that because I did have the one that failed, and you know, it just kind of has that look and feel of one of those cheap compressors with a short duty cycle, I would worry about that for future use and longevity. The first couple of times I used it, I noticed it had like a little bit of a burned smell to it, and so I was worried that I was overworking it, and so I would like blow out the kitchen sink on the cold and the hot side. And then I would go do something else packing up, and then I would go and I would do the bathroom sink, the cold and the hot side. And then I would go and do something else, and then I would go back. And that really probably is the best way to do it because it keeps that duty cycle down and gives it a little bit of a rest in between. But after 2 or 3 times, I didn't notice that smell anymore. It could have just been like a break-in smell. And so it has kept up with me just winterizing like normal. Now I will at least purposely take like 1 5-minute break in the middle of it. But the way that I do it is I go around and I drain down all of the faucets and everything. And then after that, I go and do it a second time. That way I get most of the water droplets out of everything. So after you go around twice and do everything, that is, you know, quite a bit of a length of time for this thing to be running non-stop. And so I do try to stop and at least take 1 break, like I say. Another negative point about it, which, you know, could be looked at as positive, they had good intentions here. So if you have to mount it somewhere where you can't get to it, they do give you a remote on-off switch. So like if you mounted it in the basement, I could have mounted it in my basement, I could have put the switch up in my bathroom. Now the problem with that is it does connect to your plumbing system with a T valve, and that does have a one-way valve in it. But there is potential for that to fail. And so with that, they do give you a manual cutoff switch for that air, so water doesn't back up through that one-way valve the wrong way, fill the air compressor up with water, and then just start spewing water all over wherever you've got it mounted inside your camper. And so because of that, I think that you really need to mount it somewhere where you can get to the main unit, because you're going to want to turn that safety on and off every time you use it, just to be good and safe about things. All right, so now that we've talked about the pros and the cons, let's walk you through how we use the Lippert Floe to drain down our entire camper every other week during the winter time this season. Step 1, I'm going to recommend that you turn the water heater off. I'm going to actually recommend that you turn the water heater off probably the night before, at least an hour or 2 before. I don't always do this, but you are going to have potential to burn your hands there if the water's still hot in the tank when you're letting it out, and that's just common sense. So then whenever I get ready to winterize, the next thing that I always do is I go and open my fresh water drain. The reason that I do that is because I always use my water tank in the wintertime. I don't ever use a heated water hose or none of that stuff. I get down in the 20s all the time. I never had any problems. With this camper, I do have an enclosed underbelly, and I also have tank heaters, so I don't have any issues. But I will say all of that stuff, when you camp in the wintertime, there is margin for error everywhere, and it can happen. That being said, the first step that I do is I open the fresh water drain to be letting that tank empty out. I usually try to do this in the campground before I leave to go home, and that way I don't have to do anything else once I get home. It's just fresh water, it's not gonna hurt anything. The next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna go turn our water heater bypass on, because you gotta have that on in order to drain the water heater. So you're going to turn your water heater bypass on. Then what you want to do is you want to drain the hot water. If you have a Suburban water heater like me, mine's a 6-gallon Suburban, you're going to need a 1 1/16 socket or wrench in order to get that anode rod loose. You're going to loosen that thing up. You're going to pull it out. When it pulls out, that water's going to start flowing. Usually doesn't get you too much if you're just standing over to the side a little bit. It's not too bad at all. But like I say, it can be worse if it's still hot. This is a very good time to check your anode rod. Make sure that you got plenty of material left on there. If it's getting down to where it looks pretty bare and looks like just a wire there, you need to go ahead and replace it. I will say that I've also got one of the nozzles to clean the water heater out, spray up in there. I got one of those at the end of the season last year, but I didn't have anything in my water heater. And I think because I drain it down every couple of weeks, it just keeps everything flushed out and keeps it from building up in there. Now the next thing that I usually do, which really should be before you take out the anode rod and drain the system down, just in case you forgot to turn the water heater off, is to flip that on-off switch on that Suburban water heater on the outside and flip it to off. That switch is there for one reason, and that reason is to protect your water heater, because if you forget that the water heater doesn't have water in it, and you turn the electric water heater on, then it's going to burn out your heating element. Boom, like that, just like a home water heater. And so this prevents that from happening. So if you have a switch there, you can turn it off. If you forget, you go camping next time, you hook everything up, you click your water heater on. The water's not going to get hot because there's no water in the heater, but it's not going to mess anything up, and that's going to make you think, there's something that I forgot to do. I need to go put that anode rod back in. I need to fill it up with water, and then I need to flip that switch on. After this, I usually take the anode rod and I just set it horizontally right inside the bezel of the water heater, and I go ahead and put the cover back on. It doesn't even matter if it's still draining out. Water will drain through there, no problem. But I go ahead and get that all ready to go. Now, if it's going to be a long time before you go back and use your camper again, you may want to put the anode rod back in. Just simply because I did leave it out a long time one time and it had a little bit of rust on there. And those things are kind of hard to get in and out just because of the weight on the end, and you don't want to cross thread anything. And so I had it really kind of rusting up on me on the threads one time. I had to buy a tap and just clean everything out. So to prevent that, I don't really see a problem with storing it with the anode rod inside the water heater, but a lot of people don't recommend that. But if there's no water in there, it's not going to hurt anything. You might have a little residual drop in the bottom of the water heater, but it wouldn't hurt anything. Oh, another tip when you're draining that water heater, if you want to open the high pressure valve there, it's going to drain a lot faster. So you just take your finger and you just push that valve open, and that's going to make the water drain a lot faster just because it's going to have a vent in the top of it. The next thing that I usually do is drain my fresh water drains. Now, I relocated mine to the side so they come out pretty near the water heater, because Keystone put mine right in the middle of the camper, and they were such a pain to get to that I never used them because I didn't want to crawl all the way up under the camper. And I never had any negative side effects from that or anything. I never had any pipes bust or anything like that. But it is a better practice just to go ahead and drain that down. When I relocated them, I have valves on them now, so you don't even have to take the caps off. You just open up the valves and let it drain till there's no more water coming out of there, and then open up the other side and let it drain till there's no more water coming out of there. And that just kind of gives you a head start on draining the system down. All right, so for the next step, what you can do before you open the low point drains, it doesn't really matter, but the next step is going to be to turn on the Lippert Floe so that it has power and it pressurizes. So after it runs for a few seconds, it should turn off, and then you're ready to go around and start winterizing. So when I'm winterizing, I usually do start with the outdoor faucets. And so I have one that's a hose that's right beside my water heater that has a hot and cold. I usually get that first. And so I turn on the cold, let it go until there's mainly just air coming out. Now, you're not going to get it where there's not any water droplets whatsoever coming out of there, so just give up on it, because I tried and tried and tried, and you're going to stand there all day and nothing's going to be any safer. Because if there's not enough water to freeze up in there and bust something, then it's not going to get you anywhere. Just realize that there's going to be some moisture left in the system. So after you drain all the cold water down and it's mostly air coming out, you turn that cold water off, turn the hot water on. Let that drain down until it's mostly air coming out. And then I go around the camper to the front where I have an outdoor shower, do the same thing. Hot on the outdoor shower, and then cold. Cold and hot, it doesn't matter which side, you just gotta do both sides. Then my common practice is I usually go to the kitchen sink and do the same thing. Turn on the hot water, let it go until there's not very much moisture left in there, and then turn on the cold water. Let it go until it's drained out. After I get done in the kitchen, then I go to the bathroom and I start with the sink. Hot water, then cold water. And when I'm done with the bathroom sink, I go to the shower and do the same thing. Hot water, cold water. I usually do let the shower head hang down toward the floor. That way there's just not water building up in that hose, and it drains more of it out, in my opinion. And then after the shower, the last thing that I usually do on that first trip around is the toilet. So you wanna put your foot and push the pedal halfway down where it usually has water coming out of it, and you'll have a little water come out of the toilet, and then you'll start hearing air coming. And after that, you're essentially done, but I like to go through and do everything twice because I do like to make sure that I get all the moisture I can out of the system. But like I said, you just can't be too picky about it, because no matter what you do, even if you use the compressor and you raise the pressure up a little bit past that 20, you're still gonna have a little bit of moisture come out of each spot when you first turn it on. You're gonna notice a few small water droplets, but I really don't think that that's gonna be an issue with anything. So after I go around and do everything the second time, we're still not done, because there's one issue that if you use the Lippert Floe or any of the other methods that I'm going to teach you guys in the future, that you're going to have another weak point. Before, the weak point was at the pump, but this time the water's going through the pump, so that's covered, but there is another weak point. Can you guess where it is? The weak point this time turns into that city water inlet valve, because you never push any air through that. So that, like usually a foot or so piece of pipe that connects from that city water inlet to your plumbing system, that can still have quite a bit of moisture in there. The workaround for this is that there is another one-way valve inside your city water inlet. And to get to this, you have to remove the screen protector on there that kind of keeps a bunch of junk from getting into your plumbing system from the water hose. But you got to pull that out. The easiest way is to take like a flathead screwdriver or something like that, or a butter knife, and just kind of scoop it from the edge and pull it out. I use a key if I can't find anything else and I forgot to bring anything, but it's not that big of a deal. It just sits in there because there's a hose washer around it, and just like any of the other hose washers, it just sits right there. So you just pop it out, and then you'll see this thing in the middle, and a lot of times there'll be like something sticking out of the middle of it. And what that is that's something where the water pressure is holding that open. That's the valve, it's holding it open when water's coming in. And so whenever this water stops coming in, that valve closes, and that way you don't backflush into the water supply or something like that. And even more importantly, as I found out on one of my very first camper projects, if you have that valve break and you use your water pump in your tank, you turn that water pump on, water will just start spraying out the side of the city inlet. And so I had a video on that. It was one of my first videos, and I didn't know what I was doing. So don't judge me, but it's up here. A lot of people watch it because apparently that's a pretty big problem people have on how to replace that city water inlet. So all you do with that is you take your finger and you push it in the middle where that little stick's poking out. Now when you do that, a bunch of water is going to spray out at you because you got all the air pressurizing the system there, and it's going to go the only way that it can go, and that's back out towards you. So stand over the side, push that in, and that water is just going to spray out. Now theoretically after that, you shouldn't have any more water anywhere in your system that's going to be enough to cause you any issues whatsoever. Just be sure to go turn that Lippert Floe off and turn that safety on the airline to closed. That way you're ready to go next time. All in all, it's a pretty simple system. If you want to invest in one, you want to use it. All in all, it's a pretty good system. But the weakest link is the air compressor that's inside it. I don't know how it'll do longevity-wise, but it is, because it's so easy. Like I say, it's the way that I winterized probably 10 times this year. I don't know a lot about winterizing other rigs because I've only winterized 2 campers. And so neither one of those had like an ice maker or a water filter built in or anything like that. So I don't know a lot about that stuff. But this should take care of your basic winterization for your basic camper needs. Thanks guys for watching. Tune in next week and find out what the adventure is then.
Do not forget to hit that subscribe button.